Welcome back to Watch the Booker Man and to the continued rebuild of WCW in the year 2001. And what we have tonight for you is WCW Nitro Uncensored, the final special episode before we go to our second pay-per-view of the save, Starrcade 2001. And I think this is likely to be the very last special episode of Nitro we do full stop, because as of the year 2002, we will be returning to a full-time 12 pay-per-view a year schedule. Now, tonight's episode is uncensored, and what I'm basically doing with that is, without saying it overtly, this is an ECW-inspired show. Okay, I was going to say I expect a quiet week, and I'll skip through to when our negotiations are accepted. We can see that Sabu is not considering our contract, and I'd imagine it could be to do with the fact that it's only a 3-month deal, but I'm going to offer him 12.5 per month, but I have a better offer. So do I just go exclusive handshake deal, but then I put, let's say, 1,500 an appearance? I already run into a snag here. So he doesn't want to come exclusive to me, but he's willing to accept that from them, which is not really a very good deal. This doesn't really make much sense to me. Merch cut's the same. Travel's not covered. I don't think that's going to make a major difference. What if we give him a per month deal, but it's on a handshake? I don't really know how that works, though. So we pay him 12,500 and we can use him as much as we want, but it's only a handshake deal. What I'm going to do is I'm going to offer him this deal to get him through the door and then renegotiate when he's here, essentially. And also he's taking the mick a bit there by saying, you offered me more money. I offered you more money because it was a different deal. Again, he's already been on my bad books, so he will sign, but maybe I need to stop taking these things so personally. Dusty Rhodes I've still not forgiven for demanding to be made a locker room leader on his first night in the company. New Jack and Steve Corino got into an argument. I'm surprised. Well, luckily Steve Corino should still be in a position to wrestle for us. We'll find out soon enough, I guess. Their offer is not being seriously considered. So it does look like we will be getting Sabu. I just hope that he doesn't wait until the last minute, because I do have a backup plan for if Sabu can't come in, but I'm not going to have time to sort out that backup plan, so it's just going to be a pretty underwhelming appearance from someone else. Please don't do this to me, Sabu. I'm already taking a risk. I was already concerned that he's not, the most easy to control person. All going on in the WWF as well. We're not the only one having issues, at least. Steve Corino will appear on NWA Wildside in the future, and that's the news that I needed to see. RVD's going to be buzzing to have Sabu joining the roster. WWA have made a contract to Scott Steiner, who is now free from his injury, so that is something that I will be more than countering. I will be offering him a written exclusive deal, a huge contract for Scott Steiner, but I do think we will just go 1 year. He's going to be 40 when this contract expires, so I think it's probably wise just to give him a year and see how that goes. Whether Scott Steiner would have been willing to take that in the year 2001, I don't really care, because it's pretty important that we get this man signed in time for Starrcade. It's a good job that I was reminded of that by the game, because signing Scott Steiner had completely slipped my mind, and his debut is just around the corner. The backstage situation in WWF is absolutely awful, to be fair. Who's this? Bloody hell. Scott Steiner wants to appear tonight, it looks like, but you're going to have to wait for a week at least, Scott Steiner, because you are not appearing on the WCW Uncensored show, but it'll be very, very soon when we see Scott Steiner. I'll now go into tonight's WCW Nitro. This is a night where I should probably be giving people the night off, because it's kind of a reduced roster that I'll be using in the 90 minutes, but I don't know whether I want to use people in pre-recorded segments or anything like that, so I'm just going to skip that. We will, of course, make sure that we pick the right venue, the Manhattan Center Hammerstein Ballroom. This venue is selected, so we are locked in to New York City as we go into the booking team meeting, and I think we've only got a handful left here, so I'll be getting a finish, maybe even try and get 2 finishes here. Likely to succeed. I'll definitely be keeping that, and we'll get another. I'm not going to keep any gambles. Angle idea we will use. I'm not going to use it, so there's no point in keeping it. And then I'm going to take a character idea, because I do like... Oh no, I'm not going to take anything because we've run out of points. But hopefully no serious locker room incidents. You can hang out, no worries about that. Shannon Moore is in wrestler's court, accused of not joining everybody else on a night out. Buff Bagwell kicking off with the morale officer. Mike Awesome kicking off with the morale officer. Billy Silverman getting ribbed because of how much he's been influenced by DDP. That's interesting. Bob Sapp sorting out a poker tournament. Fit Finlay doing the job that we ask him to do. and there's no point in addressing the locker room, I don't think, or we'll do an open forum, see how people feel. Everybody's got a small morale boost, all the people I think who are unhappy on the roster anyway. That is the 3 matches that are pre-booked in the game. We also have Mike Awesome in action against a hand-picked opponent of Shane McMahon, which was suggested to him by Arn Anderson last week. And we have Hugh Morrus challenging any ECW alumni, essentially, without saying the words himself. Any extremely crappy wrestler who wants to face him in the Hammerstein Ballroom, he's more than happy to fight them in what should be hopefully a bit of a hotbed, a hostile environment for him. Again, I don't know how strong the ECW nostalgia would be just 6 months after, but with the card that we've got together anyway, I think Juventud and Super Crazy is going to be a great match anyway. Extreme Outsiders versus the King's Court is going to be a good match anyway, and I say good match, it's going to be a wild brawl, but you know what I mean, it's going to suit our crowd. And yeah, Rob Van Dam v Lance Storm, I don't think there's a wrestling audience in the world that wouldn't appreciate that match. That's the roster that we're working with. We have got so many people at the minute. Pretty soon, I think I'm going to try and do a lot of the admin in 2002, because the focus now is for me on the build to Starrcade, but then like setting up a roster for TCW, maybe doing a soft brand split between Nitro and Worldwide, just so that things are a little bit easier to control. I do see that Scott Steiner is only rated as a star there, so he's on a par with Jerry the King Lawler apparently. That's not something to be discussing now. WCW Uncensored about to be put in the game, and I'll see you on the other side for what I'm thinking will be our best match ever, unless it goes the other way and we get that penalty for it being the 4th time that these two have wrestled. And I'm also expecting probably the best show that we've booked so far here from the Hammerstein Ballroom. WCW Nitro Uncensored, live from the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City, begins with a really great Cruiserweight Championship match. I think we knew this was going to be a really good match, but it's back and forth, pretty even, based around high spots as you would expect, and we get it super crazy. We're in the Hammerstein Ballroom, those balconies are made to be jumped off, and Super Crazy does just that. We saw him do it many times in ECW, and he takes a huge dive. You can see there's a lot of interference in this match. We've got Psicosis, The Masked Man, Sugar Shane, AJ Styles, Yoshihiro Tajiri, Cash and Jamie Noble. Now that might sound like a lot of interference, but they are basically only in the match so that they can form a big cluster of people to make it as safe as possible for Super Crazy to do this crazy bump, and it seems like it paid off. So they're then not even a factor in the rest of the match, but Juventud Guerrera does manage to basically break himself off from that group of people, so he isn't hit by the impact of Super Crazy, and this allows him to take control and win the match with a Michinoku Driver 2. So a great showing for Super Crazy, and despite his defeat, this is probably the biggest moment we've seen from him, being the one willing to take that crazy bump to start the show. And a 72, I believe, is the best Cruiserweight match that we've had so far, and considering I'm pretty high on Sugar Shane, it does say that the likes of Juventud Guerrera, Super Crazy, and probably some of those other guys involved in this match too, the Cruiserweight division is in pretty good hands going forward, and to me, the perfect way to kick off an ECW inspired show with a couple of incredible luchadors. And we continue after that. Psicosis and the Masked Man join Juventud Guerrera in the ring, with the Cruiserweight champion standing tall. Sugar Shane is the first of that group of men taken out by Super Crazy's dive from the balcony to return to his feet, and takes the ill-advised move to go after the Cruiserweight champion and his Lucha Real associates. Of course, he is still fuming with both Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera, but perhaps even more so that Masked Man who cost him the Cruiserweight championship just a few weeks ago. As Sugar Shane is beaten down by the 3 men, Rey Mysterio makes his return to WCW, so straight out of the great match into a huge shock appearance here, he takes the fight to his old rivals, sending them to the outside. Rey Mysterio then comes face to face with that Masked Man who is wearing his old mask. We do know, as you can see from the picture, Rey Mysterio comes out unmasked. I felt like just forgetting that part of his history in WCW just didn't work for me. Understandably, the WWE brought him back and put him right back under the mask, and it worked fantastically well. I mean, 25 years later, he is still one of the top guys in the company, and just obviously merchandise-wise and everything. But I did feel like we had to bring back the Rey Mysterio Jr. that we saw at the end of WCW, and whether I come up with some sort of workaround to get his mask back on in the future, who knows. But this is part of that, because the Masked Man rolls out the ring, but he's stopped in his tracks by AJ Styles and Yoshihiro Tajiri, who themselves are now back to their feet. The 2 men deliver that Masked Man to Rey Mysterio Jr., who takes him down with ease before grabbing him in position to remove that mask, we reveal that Chavo Guerrero is the man who has been under that hood for the last few weeks, but we see that Rey Mysterio keeps a hold of the mask as Chavo rolls out of the ring. The 3 Lucha Real members walk up the ramp, back up the ramp, away from Rey Mysterio, who is back in WCW, and while he's obviously been involved with the Cruiserweight storyline here, I do think that long term I do see him as being above the Cruiserweight division, but I felt this was a good way to highlight and showcase him, and Uncensored getting off with a bang. That episode of Nitro 2 weeks ago after Halloween Havoc was absolutely huge. But in terms of shocks, twists and turns, this one may be even better. Now, I didn't realise how generic the name of Rey Mysterio's gimmick was there, but we do get an adequate rating for his gimmick, and the Cruiserweight versus Lucha Royalty storyline continues with this segment. It loses heat, but it's still a 60 rated segment, so I'm not complaining one bit. Following a whirlwind start, excuse my spelling there, to WCW Nitro Uncensored, the commentators lay out what is still to come on this week's show. So I wonder what I'm doing sometimes when I type out these shows. However, it isn't long before there is a disturbance in the crowd. Within moments, we see a referee run down to the ring. He's obviously got the word from the back as he calls for the bell. The camera see that Tommy Dreamer and Hack and Prince Brian Lawler and Sir Nelson Knight have already begun brawling. I've written Hack there as well, and it's the Sandman for tonight, and I'm thinking from tonight, but the commentators explain that given this is an Extreme Rules match, it falls outside of the usual regulations, and that means that if the referee wants to, he can start this match from the crowd in the Hammerstein Ballroom, and this is essentially a very, very quick squash match, to be fair. Extreme Outsiders have the better of the vast majority of the match. A complete hardcore spot fest, essentially. We don't really care about anything else other than the heels getting hit with a lot of weapons from the baby faces. We probably even have a moment in front of Jerry the King Lawler where Brian Lawler's getting absolutely destroyed with a chair or something that Jerry Lawler just is absolutely hating every minute of this, but there is nothing he can do, and we eventually return to the ring where Tommy Dreamer can hit Prince Brian Lawler with a DDT, and this comes after they managed to take Nelson Knight out, possibly knocking him off the stage or some spot that means that it is then Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman able to beat the crap out of Brian Lawler. Throughout, the King's Court have tended to get the better of the Extreme Outsiders, but in New York City it is Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman who get a huge level of vindication. And when we do book these hardcore matches, we see that Sandman and Dreamer are absolutely fantastic. They worked really, really well together, and I'm happy with a 53 rating for what is essentially a squash. The Extreme Outsiders stand tall in the ring, and we essentially are saying Lawler and Knight have sort of served their purpose for me now, I'd say. They're probably still going to be around until Starrcade, because I've got a couple of angles actually in the build to the Starrcade match that we've got planned around these groups, but they're basically there now just to take defeats because they don't have massive upsides other than a little bit of overness that we can hopefully pass over to somebody else. The two men then take a microphone, talk about their history in this city, telling the fans that they are keeping the spirit of Extreme alive every single week on WCW Nitro. Tonight is far from over though, especially for the King's Court. They then turn their attention to Jerry the King Lawler at the commentary position, telling him that he is the outsider tonight, not them, and they warn his stooge, Hugh Morrus, that he does not know what he has got himself in for tonight with the extreme open challenge that he has made. The King's Court will not be leaving this building in one piece, just like Brian and just like Nelson, and they say that that includes Jerry the King Lawler. As the two men leave back through the crowd, Jerry Lawler remains somewhat smug, knowing that despite their threats of violence, the two men cannot touch Jerry Lawler. That is a contractual stipulation, so he feels very much like he is safe from that, but it's another really good segment, and if this show can keep up like this, I do think it's going to be a very, very good episode. Not so good here is a interview from Rob Van Dam. Maybe I've just expecting better or hoping for better, given that I did notice the United States Championship storyline is not where we want it to be. To be fair, you can see even a 67 segment is gaining heat to it, so hopefully a couple of other segments I've got do add some heat going into the main event, because there is that risk. As much as I expect this to be a fantastic match, and let's be honest, in reality it would be absolutely brilliant, there is that risk that it's the fourth singles match that they've had, and things could very, very much fall apart. So if there's something to stick around for at the end, it's whether we're having one of our best main events ever or potentially one of our worst. He will defend the United States Championship against Lance Storm, and he says the last time he wrestled in this building, he was victorious, and he intends to come out on the winning end again tonight. He says that the beauty of a ladder match is that there could be no excuses and no questions after this. Whoever grabs onto the United States Championship and pulls it down, they will leave as the United States Championship, and despite the fact that he may be due a rematch or whatever, he's agreed that the two men will not wrestle again after tonight. This is the final singles match between Rob Van Dam and Lance Storm, while either one of them has the United States Championship. I'm not writing off that in a couple of years they may not face off again, but for now, this is the end of the rivalry. We then get the entrance of Mike Awesome, a very, very bad promo. He is angry, annoyed that he has to come out and wrestle in front of these pieces of crap in New York City, and I'm expecting him to get a pretty negative reaction. But even worse for him, Shane McMahon hasn't even told him who he will be facing. Well, Mike Awesome is here, and he is ready to fight. So who has Shane got for him? Mike Awesome's opponent is somebody very, very familiar to him, perhaps familiar to a lot of the fans in the building, but probably a stranger to many of our Nitro viewers, so hopefully the crowd in the building can get over Masato Tanaka, and also hopefully the commentators can put him over as one of the toughest competitors that Mike Awesome has ever faced. I did think I'd put this as a 10-minute match, so 11 minutes and 29, longer than I expected, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. It's a good match overall. Tanaka, who has basically no overness in the United States, I don't think, or very little compared to Mike Awesome, doing better than Awesome in this match. That's a little bit of a concern. I did think we'd be giving Mike Awesome a main event push when this save started, but he is lacking something that means that he's probably better in the mid-card, upper mid-card role at the minute, and we're saying that the rules are relaxed for tonight's show as well. So Mike Awesome defeats Masato Tanaka when he powerbombs him from the ring to the outside through a table, the popular spot between these two. But this is WCW, not ECW, so the referee goes and checks on Masato Tanaka and just declares the match over. I think this sort of makes Mike Awesome look even more of a threat in that he stopped Masato Tanaka, but also Tanaka doesn't have to take a pin. And whether this finish, a non-finish in a sense, but clearly a decisive win for Mike Awesome, whether that doesn't go down with the crowd well and perhaps get some boos, I think that'd play into the favour of it. But it's a decent wild brawl. Let's be honest, in reality, this would have been an absolutely brilliant match. It's just the fact that Tanaka isn't that well known by the WCW audience, and Mike Awesome stands tall, having sent a dominant message following an incredibly hard-fought match between him and one of his greatest ever rivals. We saw the match they had in 2005 in ECW One Night Stand, so I think this probably would have been even better than that, as Tanaka is attended to by medics, but does manage to walk out of his own volition. Mike Awesome stands tall in the ring, seemingly just as angry as he was prior to his match. Under all the story, we are just giving Mike Awesome a decisive victory here that hopefully gets his momentum and his overness back where we want it to be. We then return from the break with, this was supposed to be the big segment on tonight's show, so I think this is the best rated angle that we've got, or will be around there, so when we factoring that into the final rating, we do need this main event to deliver for it to be one of our better shows. But we see Diamond Dallas Page on the balcony, and he is watching the show with Dustin Rhodes, Dusty Rhodes, and the Natural Born Thrillers. Just some of our top faces have decided that they want to watch this show from a bird's eye view, and they are chatting and laughing with Diamond Dallas Page seemingly holding court with the group. Coming out from the back, Shane McMahon makes his entrance and puts over the crowd on what he calls a special night for World Championship Wrestling. This is the final special episode that we'll be seeing before Starrcade 2001, and when WCW gets back to regular pay-per-views in 2002, Shane McMahon wants to bring WCW back to New York City. So he's basically just coming out saying that he wanted to experience the amazing atmosphere in this building tonight, and to hopefully get a pop, saying that we will be back for a pay-per-view next year. Shane McMahon briefly promotes next week's episode of WCW Nitro, where Booker T will defend the World Heavyweight Championship against Vader, amongst a few other big matches we have planned. He then looks to put over the huge main event ladder match. The idea here was that it'd add a lot of heat to the storyline between Rob Van Dam and Lance Storm. We see it has gained heat to it, but probably not as much as I would have liked the final showdown between the two men, and putting his personal feelings aside, Shane says that he thinks tonight is a match that is going to be a match of the year candidate, one of the best matches we've seen since WCW came back, and he's not going to take much longer. He just wants to soak in the atmosphere tonight. However, he announces that next week Ric Flair will again make an appearance on Nitro as the guest of honour, and that's going to make it an even more unmissable episode than it is. We're going to hear from Booker T later tonight, and he will reveal what Ric Flair's role will be next week, advancing a few storylines there as we can see, with a solid rated segment, just not as good as I might have hoped it to be. The commentators then put over the rest of the show as Jerry the King Lawler turns attention to Hugh Morrus, who is due to issue his open challenge up next. Once in the ring, Hugh Morrus cuts a heat-seeking promo, tearing into the extremely crappy wrestling that used to pollute this garbage-filled city. Hugh Morrus runs down Tommy Dreamer and Sandman, firing back on what they had to say earlier, saying that they might be at home here, but they are outsiders in WCW, and he's not going to let them forget that. Hugh Morrus goes off on the fans and the place they're from before the entrance of the person who has accepted his open challenge, and I actually thought, with hopefully a hostile crowd towards Hugh Morrus here tonight, letting him improvise, letting him see what he can do, riffing off the crowd, we did decide to not script this promo, so a little sign of faith that I have in Hugh Morrus and this character that he's doing currently, but also just the fact that I just think it'd work really well for him to be able to go a little bit off script here rather than sticking to what we tell him to say. You might notice on tonight's show as well, there's not been very many backstage segments. We're keeping it almost like a live show experience, action after action after action. We're not wasting time here with backstage skits. We are going straight through as if it's like a pay-per-view in a way. We did have the RVD interview, but the in-ring promo from Hugh Morrus leads to the entrance of a former ECW World Heavyweight Champion, Mikey Whipwreck. So a little bit underwhelming perhaps, but it is a squash match just for Hugh Morrus to face somebody who we know can sell really well, who we know is good at gaining sympathy, but ultimately somebody who Hugh Morrus can look dominant and hopefully get a lot of heel heat with. He's one of my favourite heels to book, I have to say. I've spoke at length about how much I dislike Hugh Morrus, and that's what makes him perhaps the best heel that we have. Once again, I forgot to have him win by the chicken wing, but he hits a moonsault, and it's a decent performance from Hugh Morrus. It does cool the crowd a little bit, but again, we can bring them down and build them back up hopefully in time for that main event. After the match, Hugh Morrus stands tall in the ring, and hopefully again a very negative reaction from the crowd, a hostile environment, so he's just putting his arms out and he is absolutely delighted to be getting booed. He's inviting the boos on as he goes and grabs a microphone. He says that he's not done. Is this the best you've got? And he's just again amping up the heel antics to a really, really high level. Jerry Lawler boasting and gloating on commentary. When the lights go out, when visibility returns in the Hammerstein Ballroom, there is a man stood behind Hugh Morrus, the homicidal, genocidal, suicidal, death-defying Sabu. And I need to find where we're up to in this segment because I did wait to click through so that there was perhaps a little bit of a surprise there. Sabu stood behind Hugh Morrus with a steel chair. He throws it at him, takes him out in his trademark style. We know again, Sabu, like Rob Van Dam, very, very innovative when it comes to using a steel chair. He sends him to the outside before taking flight from the ring to the outside with the steel chair to take out the twisted jester of the King's Court. Sabu then stands at the bottom of the ramp and does his trademark point to the sky stance before turning around towards the commentary position and pointing directly at Jerry the King Lawler. Jerry runs out of there in fear, absolutely terrified to see this absolute crazed lunatic coming after him. Luckily for Jerry, he manages to get out of there, but hopefully making Sabu look every bit of the terrifying nightmare prospect he is for the King's Court. And this is a really, really good segment, way better than I expected. The best thing on the show so far, or is it tied with the opening match? That was maybe 72, I think, actually. The dirt sheet shows us, I was trying to see why necessarily we were getting such a good rating, and I think it's just, we based it on, Sabu was just an attacker, it was an attack and victim from Hugh Morrus. The first part was promo from Hugh Morrus as well, so getting a 65 is really good. But then I think it was also Jerry Lawler on dramatic acting for the second part that's boosted this up. Oh, what an absolute shame that this isn't associated to the storyline. I forgot to add Sabu to the storyline. The one good thing that happens on it, that's probably why it got such a good rating, to be fair. If it was attached to the storyline, it would have got dragged down like so many other things. I'm going to go back here now and make sure that I put Sabu in the storyline. And we then do have a little bit of a break from the in-ring action as a video package airs showing the dominance of Big Van Vader since his return to WCW earlier this year. Recently joined by Kanyon and Curt Hennig in a stable now known as the Triad, Big Van Vader looks even more of a threat than ever before, 1 week prior to challenging for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in a title versus streak match, losing heat to the main event storyline. But we do have a promo from Booker T coming up that I think should, or hope should, lift it back up. We then get what is by far the best segment I think that we've had in this storyline, as coming out from the back and storming to the ring with Dawn Marie behind him but no sign of Bob Sapp, Steve Corino makes what appears to be an unscheduled appearance on the show. Once in the ring, he ignores the crowd, instead turning his attention to that gathering of WCW wrestlers on the balcony. Steve Corino is angry and calls out these smug pieces of crap who have been sat there on their asses all night enjoying the show. He calls out Dustin Rhodes, Dusty Rhodes, and mainly focuses on Diamond Dallas Page, who he sees as the ringleader of that group. Corino tears into the man ahead of the match next week, where he will team with Bob Sapp against DDP and Dustin Rhodes. DDP tells Corino to bring it, why don't you come up here and we fight? But Corino says, no, you sit there and enjoy the show, because it's the last thing you'll be enjoying. Next week on Nitro, him and Bob Sapp are finishing these guys once and for all. And again, going a little bit different tonight in doing the segment off script. Now, Dustin Rhodes performing poorly apparently, but Diamond Dallas Page doing really well, and him and Corino both improvising, making this a much better segment than it would have been, and thankfully gaining heat to their storyline. So really happy with that segment, and it's not even one that has a big story development in it. It's literally just Steve Corino being able to do what he did in ECW and cut a compelling promo, hopefully the king of old school of course, back in the Hammerstein Ballroom and going after DDP and Dustin Rhodes. It's still worrying me here that this 65 rated segment is adding heat to the storyline associated with the championship match up next. Breaking away from the action on the night, the commentators introduced a sit-down interview conducted by Mike Tenay earlier this week with the World Heavyweight Champion Booker T. Booker T spoke about defending his World Heavyweight Championship against the undefeated Big Van Vader next week, and his plans for Starrcade should he make it through the challenge of the big man. Booker T was also asked about what Ric Flair said to him during the conversation when he appeared a couple of weeks ago. Booker T says that some of what Ric said to him will remain private, but he appreciated the words that Ric had to say about him publicly during the interview. Booker T says that Ric Flair will be at WCW Nitro next week and has offered to be in the corner of the World Heavyweight Champion when it comes to that main event match. So he's saying if Curt Hennig and Kanyon want to be at ringside, then it looks like Ric Flair will also be there. He also gave comment on the main event of Uncensored. I did mean to do this unscripted, but it doesn't say anything about it, so I think I may have actually scripted this in the end and forgot to change it to improvised. If it had been improvised and he'd have done well, we might have added even more heat to that United States Championship storyline, but I think now this is where we go into the main event of WCW Nitro. Okay, so it gets to 73, so that's worse than the matches we've had before, so shouldn't that... Maybe this is something that's changed recently, but I'm sure if you did the fourth match and it wasn't as good, it used to really tank the rating. So a 73, while worse than the previous matches that they've had, maybe because it's better than some of them and worse than other ones. I'm not going to think about it too much because, to be honest, I'm relieved in a sense because it says it needed to be better, but it still gets a 73. It means we're going to be on an average episode for what I thought was going to be our best one, and maybe don't play back last week's episode when I said this was definitely going to be our best match yet. But in terms of the wrestling rating, an 81, it's really good. In terms of Rob Van Dam's performance, 91, it's really good. And you can see here, I did the big bumps again. Probably overused that on tonight's show, but the fact I was able to do it and it worked and hopefully added to the match, I will check the dirt sheet for that. And I do wonder how bad this match would have been if we didn't use that creative finish. So I tried to throw everything at this to make sure that it had the best chance of being the best version of this match between them. Unfortunately, it wasn't, and the storyline's heat, like I've been complaining about all night, did contribute to that. But we do get that during the match, Christian Cage and Andrew Martin, as RVD is climbing up the ladder, seemingly clear and ready to win the title, they come out, obviously some sort of agreement that they've come to with Lance Storm to help him out. But notably, there is no Mike Awesome during this main event. The person you would expect most to be here helping Lance Storm, seemingly after his match with Masato Tanaka, has clocked off for the night. We do see, however, that Chuck Palumbo and Sean O'Haire have vacated the balcony, and obviously as Lance Storm now appears to be the one in pole position, they come out, clear the ring of Christian Cage and Andrew Martin, perhaps pushing Lance Storm off the ladder this time. That's where the two of them get their bumps in. Obviously Lance Storm doing the safer one because he wasn't willing to take that risk of a crazy bump on a television show, and I do not blame him for that one bit. But RVD then perhaps with a frog splash off a ladder to Lance Storm, and then he's able to set up another ladder that is in the centre of the ring, and he can unhook the WCW United States Championship. Now I do know it's a good rating for a main event, but it's just not what I had in mind, of course. Thinking about the ladder matches we did see Rob Van Dam have, I don't know if we ever saw Lance Storm in ladder matches, and perhaps the way I've seen him swing a steel chair, he was probably better suited to just your regular matches, so it might be fair that this wasn't his kind of thing. But knowing how Rob Van Dam meshed with certain other wrestlers of a similar style and had fantastic ladder matches with them, I do think seeing a match between these two with such high stakes at an iconic building would have been absolutely brilliant. So to me, the rating in game is only telling half the story of what would have been a brilliant match to see. And we end the show very simply. There's been a lot happening on tonight's show. We've had a number of debuts, obviously a couple of them who will be sticking around in Sabu and Rey Mysterio, a couple who were just one nights for the ECW-esque tribute sort of thing that we did. But overall, I think this has been a really good show. RVD atop the ladder, holding the United States Championship. That is now done. Lance Storm and Rob Van Dam will not be facing off again. They've been feuding since the very first show, so a very long rivalry between them, but one that I think has been very good. Also, the commentators put over the crazy night that we've just witnessed with WCW Nitro Uncensored, but argue that next week will be just as big, and in my mind this was almost a two-part show, a 3-hour special of WCW Nitro, albeit across 2 weeks, so a pretty redundant thing to say. Booker T defends the World Heavyweight Championship against the undefeated Big Van Vader. Steve Corino teams with Bob Sapp against Dustin Rhodes and Diamond Dallas Page. And the World Tag Team Champions will be in non-title action, facing the debuting Andrew Martin and Christian Cage. And remember, there's that stipulation that we set up all the way back at the start. If a team is able to defeat Sean O'Haire and Chuck Palumbo, then they will receive a shot at the Natural Born Thrillers for the World Tag Team Championships. And with Starrcade just around the corner, perhaps we can see where the direction's going there. So we do lose popularity in a couple of regions, actually, unfortunately, and only gain popularity in one. Overall, I'm quite pleased with how that episode of WCW Nitro went. We have no locker room incidents before WCW Worldwide, and I will not be addressing the locker room. There's plenty of people who were not used on WCW Nitro Uncensored, and I do think I've actually managed to get pretty much all of those people on tonight's show, so I'm pretty impressed myself for that, and we're back in just a moment. So I've managed to get pretty much everybody onto this WCW Saturday Night Worldwide show. There's only one person who I really could have put on this that I didn't, but that's Matt Jindrak, who I sort of wrote out for storyline purposes last week. David Flair comes to the ring to open the show. Wonder what reaction he'd get from the Hammerstein Ballroom crowd. A sellout, as we see, 2,600 people. He's here and he is ready to prove himself to Jimmy Hart. He set down that challenge last week, and David Flair is willing to prove that he can do whatever it takes to keep his position on Worldwide, but he wants to know who Jimmy Hart has for him. Jimmy comes out and says that he's got big expectations for David Flair, so he brought a big opponent to try and bring that out of him. He welcomes WCW's latest signing, the debuting Jerry Lynn. Now you may remember a few months ago we signed him from WWF. He got brought in on pretty good money as well on a long-term contract, but I've just not got that position for him to be in a big debuting segment on Nitro or anything, so I just thought I'd bring him in and just have him do what he can do, show his ability on Worldwide. And with plans that I've got for Worldwide within the next couple of months, there will be more sort of direction for people who are on this show. It might seem like he's gone from working on the B shows in WWF to working the B shows here, but he does pick up a decisive, dominant victory in his debut, pinning David Flair in 4 minutes and 11 following a cradle pile driver, and his 62 is an extremely encouraging first performance, even if the match itself is very poor. After the match, he celebrates his debut on Saturday Night Worldwide, and Jerry Lynn, I think, is going to be a really good addition to this roster longer term, but for now, he's just going to be an experienced head who's basically going to win a lot of matches on Worldwide, and we might see him on Nitro sooner than we think, but that depends. And I will just note I brought him in as a babyface. Initially I had a plan to bring him in and go straight into that feud with Rob Van Dam and have him as the heel, RVD as the ultimate face, but I just think that Jerry Lynn is a pretty likeable character, and if he's not going to be in that storyline, which plans have changed and he's not, I think he's better off as a face for now, and then down the line, once we've built him up, he can have that heel turn and have a proper rivalry with Rob Van Dam, rather than just bringing him in cold and booking that match because I happen to know it's going to be a great match. Kanyon and Kurt Hennig are then shown speaking with Jet in the back. They leave the room where they are then approached by Paisley. They put over Jet's chance in tonight's main event and ask whether they'll be involved, given that the match will be no holds barred. Kanyon confidently says that that will not be necessary. Jet beat Crowbar last week and he is going to put an end to this once and for all tonight. We then get a segment from a diner or whatever where Guido held a summit with the Mamalukes earlier this week and told them that they need to straighten their bickering out. In fact, he doesn't want them to come with him to Worldwide when he faces Shawn Stasiak. He's happy to deal with that alone. He's giving them the time away from WCW. Go out, have some drinks, have some food, and just get yourselves back on the same page, because once he's dealt with Shawn Stasiak and put the Sanders group behind them, well, he's got bigger plans for the group. And after this week's show, we will be going into the next phase of what I've got planned for them. Not that it's something huge, but it's just moving them away from their initial storyline. Diamond and Swinger and Pete Gas and Rodney come out to talk before the match, just being their heelish selves, and just basically further putting over as subtly as we can that Roddy and Pete Gas are paying for the friendship of Johnny Swinger and Simon Diamond. 3 Count and the Young Dragons come out, tell them to shut up, and that leads to the match where 3 Count and the Young Dragons defeat Diamond and Swinger and Pete Gas and Rodney. Gets only a 34. I think this is because, everybody is unimportant on this, so the fans weren't invested in the show. I do also note there that Kaz Hayashi may need a little bit of a freshen up, but we do give the win to the baby faces, with Shannon Moore pinning Rodney following a single underhook leg drop bulldog. Very convoluted move. I'm sure it had a name in WCW, and I'll probably try and rename it to that if I remember. The faces stand tall and shake hands, and I'm just using this as the opportunity to turn Evan Courageous and Shannon Moore face, just again evening out the roster a little bit more. Like I said before, with Jerry Lynn coming in as a face, that's again because we don't need any more heels. We're already a very, very heel heavy roster, and bringing Rey Mysterio in and a couple of other people, Sabu for example, we are redressing that balance. So I'm going to have a look after the show actually and see what the ratio is looking like of active wrestlers in face and heel categories. Billy Kidman then, you might think I'm setting him up to fail here by keep having him talk, and just obviously it's not his strong suit, but he sits down for an interview with Scott Hudson. Now, I didn't intentionally not put Rob Van Dam in this as off screen, but I'm quite pleased that this segment doesn't advance his storyline. Torrie Wilson joins him and looks pretty uncomfortable to be there throughout. He's defensive and very, very moody after being questioned about his recent actions, and basically says that if people think that he's a loser, look at his hot girlfriend. But basically saying it in as losery a way as possible. He runs down RVD and all the fan favourite wrestlers, and just being a whiny, complaining little guy throughout the interview, not doing well with our script, even with several takes. Yeah, I kind of, it's like if I wanted to expose Billy Kidman, I'd put him in an unscripted promo, but I will note that I've done most of these sit-down interviews as unscripted because that's kind of the purpose of them, to be a little bit different from what we normally see. So I promise I'm not sabotaging him. Buff Bagwell talks with Jimmy Hart in the back about his success. Last week on Nitro, he signed his new WCW contract, and he can see more people coming as stars under Jimmy Hart. He sees what he had with David Flair earlier, trying to light a fire under him. Lash LaRue, Kui Wee. Well, he thanks Jimmy Hart for his role in Buff Bagwell getting back from putting rings together, working in dark matches, to now being back on the WCW roster full time. Jimmy Hart says that it was all his pleasure. That's what Saturday Night Worldwide is here for, and he hopes that every wrestler takes the opportunity that Buff Bagwell was given and runs with it just like he did. And he is so happy to hear that Buff is going to be back in action next week on Nitro. What a match that is going to be. But Buff Bagwell's confused. What do you mean? He doesn't know that a match has been confirmed. Jimmy's surprised and said, "Oh, you're facing the Sandman in an Extreme Rules match, didn't you know?" Laughing along. Of course, Buff Bagwell's face drops. He is not happy, but I will note this was the match that resulted in him quitting WCW, so perhaps Shane McMahon taking the opportunity while he's given Buff his job back to remind him what it was that basically made him quit in the first place, and I've got an idea for that. And this match is better than I thought because I'd forgot Shawn Stasiak was still recognisable. Guido making him tap out to the armbar. Again, I need to change that in his character details, but it doesn't really matter. The point being, he pretty quickly and dominantly defeats Shawn Stasiak, making him tap out. Then Mike Sanders tries to attack him after the match, but Guido locks him in to the armbar and he taps out again. That's a pretty good rating segment, actually. I'm very, very surprised by that. I don't know what the bonuses were, just a well done segment, I guess, but really happy with that. Crowbar cuts a promo. He's ready for Jet tonight in a match where anything goes, and the promo is from like a dark area of the building, and we see he's kind of selecting what weapons he's going to put in his trolley for when he comes out for that main event match. We then get a match where I threw everybody who was still not used into an in-ring segment. Kwee Wee's couch talking to Christopher Daniels, who's selling and talking about his injury from taking 2 moneymakers last week. Skipper and Romeo come out and call him a nerd, basically. Lash LaRue, who is a bit of a nerd himself, comes out and backs. I don't know why I needed to insult Lash LaRue there, but calls out Kwee Wee for joining in the bullying. The men all start arguing before Skipper and Romeo leave. They can feel themselves becoming more unattractive by the second just being stood around these guys, so they leave. Kwee Wee and Lash LaRue carry on bickering. As we go into a training montage, Steve Corino is preparing Bob Sapp for their match with Dustin Rhodes and Diamond Dallas Page on next week's episode of Nitro. Aww. I still got 53, so could have been better if I'd have done probably just a regular match, but I do need to remember that when the crowd rating isn't so high, they're not interested in a wild brawl. I still think it's a decent match, and Crowbar defeats Jet, who didn't need the help of Kanyon and Kurt Hennig apparently, but probably wished he did have it when he was hit with a reverse DDT, perhaps to a steel chair or something like that. Crowbar gets out of the rubble. We really want this to be a bit of the idea, and of course with it getting that red note, it wasn't quite that, but just for it to be them two getting 10 minutes, a proper showcase. They got it in the normal singles match last week, and they're getting it in this hardcore match this week, and it's just opportunities that they wouldn't get on Nitro. You're not going to see Crowbar and Jet in a long match on Nitro, but Worldwide gives us the opportunity to do that, and I think that they're two really, really strong examples of people who are benefiting from us having this B-show. A 55 is a decent rating. I'm not going to complain with that at all, and we're making money, losing popularity and gaining popularity, so yeah. Not what I expected from this week, to be fair. I did think that RVD and Lance Storm, with it being in the tri-state where Rob Van Dam is significantly more over than he is anywhere else, I did expect that we would see maybe a match in the 80s, and I did expect it to be the best match we'd done so far. I don't think it's even close to being our best match after what we saw on WCW Nitro, and I don't think it's going to be one of our best shows either. I will just check where it lands. So it's the 11th best episode that we've done, and we've only booked about 25 shows, have we? 30, but yeah, probably just over 20 of them being episodes of Nitro, and it just makes the top 20 matches that I've had, as does Juventud Guerrera and Super Crazy, so I'm happy with that. That was a really good match. I love seeing a cruiserweight match at such a high level, but I will just have a quick look at, again, how anybody who is a active wrestler, whether we've got more faces or whether we've got more heels. I did recently go through and had a few people, I think Stacey Keebler, Paisley, Tori Wilson, and I think like Fit Finley was set as a wrestler when I'm not really using them as that, so I changed it. So if anybody noticed that our active roster number on the assistant page there went down from being 60 something to down to 57, I think it was, that's the reason. But this is all of our babyface wrestlers that we have on the roster. I can already see that we've got a much longer list here, but it is including Tori Wilson, which like I just said, I did think I'd taken them out. So we'll put wrestler as their role. We've got a couple of occasional wrestlers, but that doesn't really matter. So yeah, I think we're going to be just about even. I'm going to put a finger on the screen here because I won't be able to just so I can see the difference. So there's still 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 more heels than there are faces. But other than Buff Bagwell, potentially, I can't see too many people on this roster who I would like to see go babyface anytime soon. They all look like heels to me. So it's either a case of some of these guys, Mike Sanders, as a prime example, perhaps Matt Jindrak, Shawn Stasiak, going away onto the development roster, and I'll look into that again a bit further. People like Jamie Noble as well, not really being used at all. So is it better to put them down in TCW and then bring them up as and when I need them? I feel like the average overness of the faces is higher than that of the heels. And I'm just going to look here. We have had quite a bit of popularity to Little Guido already. I'm just going to change back our episode of WCW Nitro to being a normal episode for next week. But there are big things planned for it nonetheless. Ric Flair will appear once again, this time as a guest of honour, sitting in the corner of Booker T for the main event match. That'll see Big Van Vader put his undefeated streak up against the World Heavyweight Championship of Booker T. And I can see on screen there we have Shawn Stasiak with big morale issues, so it could be the case that we get his notice sometime this week. I'm not worrying too much about that. But thank you for watching this episode, and really now into the final stretch to the build of WCW Starrcade. No more special episodes coming up, just WCW Nitro, 5 more weeks, and then the biggest show of the year. Hopefully you're still enjoying the series, and I will see you for the next episode. Cheers.